You don't choose to become a fugitive billionaire. You become one because the system you expose keeps a ledger and your name is on every page. You grow up in Redmond, Washington, where the zip code smells like pine trees and server farms and the ambient anxiety of parents who work at Microsoft. Your father writes firmware for industrial control systems. Your mother teaches high school calculus. You are their only child. You are loved, adequately fed, and profoundly bored. The boredom is the dangerous part, not the genes, not the zip code. The boredom is what opens the door. You find the door at age 11, not a metaphorical door. A literal authentication portal for your middle school's administrative network. Protected by a password your vice principal set in 2009 and never changed. His dog's name, capital letter, 2 digits, no special characters. You're inside in 6 minutes using a tool you built yourself from a tutorial you found on a forum that technically required you to be 18. You don't vandalize anything. You don't steal anything. You just walk through the halls of a digital building that wasn't built for someone like you and notice every structural flaw in the architecture. There are 37 of them. You write them down in a spiral notebook you keep inside a binder labeled AP Science Fair Notes. Nobody asks about the notebook. Nobody thinks to look. By 13, you've moved past school networks. The radius expands the way a fire expands when it finally finds enough oxygen. You map corporate VPN configurations for companies headquartered within 40 miles of your house. You find exposed API endpoints in a regional healthcare provider's patient management system that would allow unauthorized modification of medical records for approximately 84,000 patients. You report it through an anonymous tip email. They patch it 6 weeks later. You know they patched it because you check. You always check. Verification isn't paranoia at this stage. It's professional standards self-imposed because nobody else is imposing them. By 15, you've disclosed vulnerabilities in 11 different organizations, power utilities, a university research database, a county election management system using software last updated during the Obama administration. Each disclosure is careful, documented, and anonymous. Each one fixes a real problem that real people would have suffered from. You are doing a public service. You know this. You also know that intent is legally irrelevant and unauthorized access is a federal crime regardless of what you did with the access. You know the gap between those two facts and you live inside it every day like a man sleeping in a doorway, technically inside, technically outside, belonging to neither space. The company is called Meridian Analytics. You find them at 16 while cross-referencing government contracting databases with known vulnerable software stacks. They hold contracts with the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and 11 state governments. Their core product is a data aggregation platform that ingests commercial data, public records, location history from mobile carriers, and social media behavioral profiles and synthesizes them into individual risk scores. Those risk scores are used by law enforcement agencies in 22 states to determine patrol priorities, parole decisions, and immigration enforcement actions. Meridian's platform isn't advertised. It doesn't have a public-facing website. It exists in the white space between what the government is legally authorized to do and what private contractors can do on the government's behalf. You spend 3 months inside their systems, methodical, documented. You read internal memos describing how the algorithm weights race as a variable through 17 layers of proxy indicators, neighborhood density, first-generation immigrant status, frequency of utility payment gaps. Each proxy is defensible in isolation. Together, they form a system that produces racially disparate outcomes with mathematical precision. You read a memo from Meridian's legal team advising executives that because the algorithm doesn't explicitly reference protected characteristics, the outputs are legally insulated from civil rights challenges. The memo is dated 4 months before a 19-year-old black man in Detroit was denied parole based on a Meridian risk score of 87. He had served his minimum sentence. His behavior record was clean. The algorithm decided he was dangerous. You read his case file. You read 43 case files like his. You don't leak immediately. That's the discipline the reference books don't tell you about. The impulse after discovering something this large is to act. The impulse is an enemy. You spend 6 weeks verifying every document against independent sources, internal contract numbers against public procurement records, employee names against LinkedIn profiles, algorithm documentation against academic papers describing the same methodology. You build a verification map, 200 nodes, cross-referenced, time-stamped, annotated. When you're finished, the documentation is airtight, not probably true, provably true, line by line, source by source. You are 16 years old and you have constructed a stronger evidentiary record than most federal investigations. The leak happens on a Tuesday in November. You route through a chain of 17 anonymizing nodes across 9 countries, use 3 separate encrypted publishing platforms, and simultaneously transmit to 2 investigative journalists, a civil rights legal organization, and an academic researcher at MIT who has published peer-reviewed work on algorithmic bias in criminal justice. You don't publish your handle. You don't want credit. You want the 43 men to get parole hearings. The documents go live at midnight. By 9 a.m., Meridian Analytics is the subject of a congressional inquiry request. By noon, their DHS contract is under review. By 3 p.m., a federal judge in Detroit orders an emergency stay on parole decision citing the Meridian algorithm pending investigation. The 43 men stay in cells one more night. But the process has started. That matters. That has to matter. The federal response is faster than anything you modeled. You modeled fast. Within 72 hours, a joint task force involving the FBI, DHS, and Meridian's own internal security team is reconstructing your network path. Not successfully yet, but the effort is serious. The resources are disproportionate in a way that tells you something important. They are not primarily interested in protecting civil rights or understanding algorithmic harm. They are interested in who did this to them. You are the wound. The investigation is the immune response. You note the distinction and it tells you everything about which direction this ends. You are not naive about what comes next. You have a plan. You built the plan 6 months before you executed the leak because the plan is not optional. It is infrastructure. Without it, you are a 16-year-old in a bedroom in Redmond waiting for a knock at the door. You have $4,200 in a prepaid card purchased with cash from a convenience store 2 counties away. You have a bag packed with 3 days of clothes, a secondary laptop with a clean operating system, and a printed list of contacts in 4 countries you have built relationships with over 3 years of forum activity. You have a fake identity prepared with the help of someone you know only as Vashti, who you have never met in person, who you trust with your life because you have verified her work on 6 other documents and it was flawless every time. You leave on a Thursday morning before your mother wakes up. You leave a letter, not an explanation because no explanation is adequate, but an acknowledgement. You tell her you're safe. You tell her what you found was real and the people it was hurting were real and you couldn't unknow it. You tell her you love her in a way that feels clinical because emotion right now is a luxury you cannot process and survive. You take the bus to Seattle. You take the train from Seattle to Vancouver. You cross the border as a different person with a different name and a different backstory that you have rehearsed until it is automatic. The border agent asks you the purpose of your visit. You tell him a hiking trip. He stamps the passport and hands it back. He doesn't look at your face long enough to remember it. You planned on that too. The months after are functional and hollow in equal measure. You move through safe houses in Vancouver, then Toronto, then Montreal, using introductions from Vashti's network, paying in cash, staying nowhere more than 3 weeks. You don't stop working. Stopping would be the real risk, not the FBI. Stopping means the only thing filling your head is what you left behind. Your mother's face when she reads the letter, Marco's interview outside your school. The 43 men in cells whose parole hearings are now delayed because the legal challenge to Meridian requires time you are no longer there to give testimony for. You keep working because the work is the only ethical response to knowing what you know and having the ability to act on it. The money comes later and it arrives in a way that changes the architecture of everything. At 18, from a safe apartment in Berlin, you identify a 0-day vulnerability in the settlement processing infrastructure of a private equity firm managing approximately $2.3 billion in assets. The vulnerability doesn't allow direct fund transfer. What it allows is the insertion of rounding discrepancies in transaction confirmations, fractions of cents per transaction redirected to external accounts invisible below the threshold of automated auditing systems. You know this technique. You've read about it in theoretical papers and federal prosecution filings that you've never used it. You sit with the decision for 11 days. The firm is called Meridian Capital Partners. You spend those 11 days reading everything about them. They are the primary investor in Meridian Analytics. They hold a 34% equity stake and 2 seats on Meridian's board. They funded Meridian's initial expansion into criminal justice applications. They lobbied against state-level algorithmic accountability legislation in 4 states, spending $2.1 million across those efforts. They are not a passive investor. They are a structural component of the same machine you already struck once. The 11 days end. You go back inside. Over 14 months, the rounding discrepancy extracts $43 million, not from account holders, from Meridian's internal management fee calculations, an abstraction layer of abstraction, firm revenue, not client assets. You verify this architecture 6 times before you begin. You are not stealing from pension funds or retail investors. You are extracting revenue from the entity that built the system that put 43 men in cells longer than their sentences required. You tell yourself this is calibrated. You know the calibration is partially rationalization. You file that knowledge in the same folder where you keep the things that are true and inconvenient and cannot be resolved right now. The $43 million moves through 11 shell entities across 6 jurisdictions over 3 years. Slowly, the way water moves through limestone, patient and geological and invisible until it isn't. You use 2% for operational security, living costs, equipment, network maintenance, document renewal. You use 11% to fund the legal organization that filed the original challenge to Meridian's algorithm. Anonymous donations routed through a charitable intermediary in Liechtenstein. The civil rights challenge succeeds 2 years after you leave. 14 men are released. You read the court decision in a cafe in Lisbon. You sit with a coffee that costs €1 and read a federal judge's ruling that cites algorithmic bias documentation you originally compiled at age 16. You feel something. It doesn't have a clean name. Oh. The remaining 87% sits in accounts you cannot touch in ways that are visible. The money is a paradox. It is security and exposure simultaneously. It is the reason you can sustain the operation and the reason the operation requires constant defensive maintenance. Every dollar is a liability. Every transaction is a potential threat. You spend more time managing the money's concealment than you spend on anything else. This is the part nobody understands about wealth assembled this way. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a second job whose primary function is protecting you from the first job's consequences. Interpol issues a red notice with your legal name at age 19, not for the Meridian leak, for the Meridian extraction. The Meridian leak is complicated legally because the public benefit argument is substantive and civil liberties organizations have filed amicus briefs in related cases. The extraction has no such insulation. $43 million is $43 million. The warrant is clean, the exposure is total. Your photograph, the one from your Redmond High School yearbook where your locks fell past their intended mark and you are not smiling the way the photographer wanted, appears on Interpol's public database next to a description that includes the phrase significant financial cybercrime. You are 19 years old. You look exactly like what you are. A kid who learned too fast and moved too far. The task force force has a name, Operation Thread Count. You know this because you are inside their case management system, not their operational files, their administrative infrastructure, scheduling systems, resource allocation databases, budget filings with internal tracking numbers. You don't touch evidence files. That would be tampering, and tampering changes the moral geometry of the entire situation in ways you are not willing to absorb. But you watch the perimeter. You watch what they're allocating, and when allocations spike. Spikes tell you about progress. Progress tells you when to move. You move 4 times in 18 months based on allocation spikes. The task force does not know they are a signal you are reading. The gap between what they know and what you know is your only real asset. You are 21 when Vashti surfaces again. Not her real name, you've always known that. She contacts you through a protocol you established together 3 years earlier. A dead drop in a private coding repository, messages disguised as commented out code in an abandoned project. She tells you the task force has identified your third shell entity. Not penetrated it, identified it. There is a difference, and the difference is approximately 6 weeks of lead time. She is giving you the 6 weeks. You don't ask how she knows. The protocol has always included the understanding that her sources are hers and the information is verified, and that is the entire basis of the arrangement. You move everything out of the third entity in 4 days, you dissolve it. By week 3, the thread the task force was following leads to an empty room. The psychological cost of this life is a balance sheet nobody prepares you for, not the paranoia. Paranoia is manageable. Paranoia is information processed through a threat model and converted into action. What is not manageable is the isolation that comes from spending years inside a version of yourself that nobody else can fully see. Your mother doesn't know where you are. She knows you are alive because you send verification signals through a system too indirect to trace. She knows you are not hurt. She does not know you are sitting in a rented apartment in Prague at age 21 with $40 million and no one who knows your actual name. You have contact with Vashti. You have contact with 3 other operators whose trust you have earned over years of professional consistency. These are not friendships. They are professional bonds organized around mutual non-disclosure and shared operational interest. They serve important functions. They are not enough. The loneliness doesn't feel the way it's described. It's not emptiness. It's more specific than that. It's the experience of having observations with nowhere to put them. You see something worth noting, a pattern, a piece of architecture that resolves something you've been thinking about, a moment that is genuinely strange or genuinely beautiful, and you have no one to tell it to. Every observation stays inside the same skull it originated in. Over enough time, the accumulation of unshared observations becomes its own weight. You carry it the way the debt collectors in the story carry the faces, not in the working hours, in the quiet ones. At 22, you find another surveillance program, larger than Meridian, not domestic, international. A consortium of 7 governments sharing a data collection apparatus that ingests biometric data from commercial platforms, cross-references it with travel records, communication metadata, and financial transaction histories, and produces targeting packages for intelligence agencies. The targeting packages are used in countries where the rule of law is theoretical. You have documentation of 14 individuals who received targeting packages and subsequently disappeared. Not metaphorically, disappeared from their homes, their families, their countries. You have before and after. Names, photographs, last known contact records, then nothing. You sit with this for 4 months, not 11 days, 4 months, because the last time you acted on something this large, 14 people died in a European transit hub, and the connection between your action and their deaths was not direct, but it was also not nothing. You know that now in a way you didn't know at 17. The world is not a system with clean causal chains. It is a system with causal chains that branch and loop and run through compartments you cannot see because the clearances required to see them were never available to you and never will be. You act on incomplete information. You always act on incomplete information. The question is whether the incompleteness is an excuse or a description. You choose to act. The documentation is airtight. The 14 disappearances are documented. The consortium's legal authorization in each member country is traceable and in 3 cases provably exceeds what domestic law permits. You have sources in 2 of the 7 governments who have verified the documents independently. The publication architecture is more sophisticated now than it was at 17. 12 simultaneous channels, 4 countries, 3 languages. The release is coordinated with 3 investigative organizations and a legal team in The Hague that has been preparing a case for 9 months. The release happens on a Monday. By Wednesday, 2 governments are facing parliamentary inquiries. By Friday, one of the 14 disappeared individuals is confirmed alive in a detention facility that officially does not exist. The task force allocation spikes within 48 hours of the release, larger than any previous spike. You read the signal and you move. You are already moving before the spike confirms it. You have been preparing the move for 6 weeks. The next location, the next identity, the next operational layer. You pack what you always pack. 3 days of clothes, the clean laptop, the printed contact list, though by now the list is memorized and the printed copy is a ritual more than a necessity. You leave the Prague apartment, you take the train to Vienna. You are 22 years old, you have $38 million you cannot spend openly. You are wanted in 19 countries. You have never met Vashti in person. You have not spoken to your mother's voice in 4 years. You have contributed to the release of 1 man from a detention facility that officially does not exist. You have watched 14 photographs of people who died on a Monday morning and understood your partial role in that geometry and carried it forward anyway, because carrying it forward is the only direction that leads anywhere. The Vienna train station is full of people moving between lives. You move with them. You are anonymous in the crowd the way a pattern is anonymous in noise, present, structured, entirely invisible. Vashti's next message arrives on a Thursday. It's in the dead drop, 7 lines of commented code. The task force has a new lead, not a shell entity this time, a behavioral pattern, the way you write code. The specific indentation habits, the variable naming conventions, the structural choices that persist across platforms and identities, the way handwriting persists across different pens. They have built a stylometric model of your coding signature from 14 samples collected across 6 6 years. The model has a 91% confidence threshold. They are running it against repositories across the public internet. The model is not looking for your name or your face. It is looking for the way you think, the way you organize information into structure, the way the inside of your mind expresses itself in syntax. You read the 7 lines and you feel something you have not felt since Redmond. Not fear exactly, recognition.